Good evening, Cardinal Country. Welcome to our 10th Red Talk. I'm Dr. Lisa McNary, Dean of Alumni and Parent Relations, and boy, do we have an exciting alumnus with us this evening. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Yaqui Smith, known for his unflinching and veracious style of storytelling, is a rising voice in independent cinema. His films have received worldwide acclaim, screening and winning awards at over 100 film festivals. His short, Katrina's Son, screened at over 40 film festivals and won 14 awards. The film was also eligible for the 2012 Academy Award in Short Filmmaking. His debut film, feature actually, Wolf, was incidentally partially shot at UIW. It was called by NPR an impressive piece by a young director, premiered at South by Southwest Film Festival, and has gone on to screen and win awards at festivals across North America. Yaqui has many other award-winning films that I'm sure he'll share with us tonight. He has been featured on NPR, CNN, HLN, Ebony Online, IndieWire, Filmmaker Magazine, Variety Magazine, Vogue Magazine, and Shadow and Act. Wow. Yaqui received his Bachelor of Arts in Communication at UIW in 2003, where he later became the youngest recipient of the Alumni of Distinction for Professional Achievement Award. He received his MFA from the University of Texas at Austin's film program, where he is currently an associate professor of film and the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Moody College of Communication. He was previously the Morgan Woodward Distinguished Professor of Film at the University of Texas at Arlington. Variety Magazine has named him one of the best film educators in the world. Now, I know all of y'all will have plenty of questions for Yaqui, so we want you to continue to ask questions throughout the production, but he will answer all of your questions at the end of his presentation. So without further ado, let's welcome Yaqui.
Hey. How are y'all doing? Thank you so much for inviting me tonight to speak to you all. Thank you to Jorge, Gabby, and Lisa and UIW, not only for inviting me tonight, but really for being very instrumental in helping me achieve what I've achieved in my sort of academic career and also my creative career. There was a lot of sort of foundational things that were laid at UIW that have stuck with me and probably will continue to stick with me for the rest of my life. And so I am really appreciative of what I got from UIW. Tonight, I kind of want to talk about my creative process. And I always like to start this by saying that my creative process is not the creative process, right? Because we oftentimes, think that there's like one way to be creative, that there's one way to write a film or one way to inspire someone. And honestly, that's not it, right? There is no one way to do anything. I believe that we will all arrive at a very similar place, but there is no one way to get there. And so as I talk tonight and I share with you these sort of 8 sort of steps that I'll call them that I've used throughout my career, again, don't think that this is it. And you will hear me say that again and again, that this is not something that I am sort of prescribing, saying, oh, you got to do this to be creative. But what I am offering you is a way that sort of has worked for me and giving you a little bit about my journey. One of the things that I believe and have always believed is that before we are anything, right, that we are creative. Before we talk, before we walk, before we see, before we hear, we are creative beings, right? As a matter of fact, I believe that our very existence is the product of creativity, because we are indeed created by a creator, right? Right. If you believe sort of the sort of biblical story of creation, right? We are spoken, right? We have been spoken into existence, right? Formed from nothing, um, brought into being, right? If you think about it from a human perspective, brought into being from a creative and intimate act, right? This sort of dancing of bodies, as this singing of spirits, right? And because of all of that, right, and because we are born of creativity, I believe that that means that creativity is always flowing through our veins, which for me is a definitive sign that we are meant to live creative lives, right? So if we think about it in this way, right, as young people, I have a 5-year-old running around, and as young people, we are always doing creative things, right? We are imagining worlds. We are sort of fearlessly testing the boundaries of the world around us. We are sort of effortlessly creating the world that we want to live in, coloring outside the lines, mixing and matching things that don't go together in the traditional sense. But at some point in our lives, we lose this, right? At some point, we allow our parents, our friends, our lovers, our acquaintances, right? The sort of world at large to talk us out of operating from a place that tonight I'm going to dub as a place of intimate or infinite, I should say, creativity, right? And for me, infinite creativity is creating without boundaries, being creative in your everyday life, right? Being creative in the sectors of your life that we don't always assume need creativity, right? Like, so being creative at that administrative work that you do, creative in that accounting work that you do, creative in the way that you engage with your students, creative in that postal work that you do, right? Just creative in the way that you live your everyday life. This for me is infinite creativity. And as I've already said, at some point in our lives, we lose that, right? Somewhere in some season of our life, the sort of analytical part of us takes over. And that's the part of us that sort of doesn't want to be seen as weird or different, right? The politically correct side of us, the side of us that would rather, please others than please ourselves. The part of us that assimilates to social norms. And in the process of doing all that, we begin to abandon the idea of innovation. We begin to abandon the idea of thinking outside of the box. And then we begin to sort of move through the world with fear and not fearlessness, right? And we stop creating on purpose, right? Now, I wear many hats, right? You heard Lisa sort of go down my bio, and I'm a professor, I'm an associate dean, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer, I'm a social activist. And though there are parts of sort of these jobs that don't interact or intersect, I believe, and I know this, that the sort of connective tissue in all of those jobs is the creativity with which I approach the work, right? So the sort of creative ways that I problem solve, the storytelling techniques that I use to galvanize and inspire my team, the ways in which my film work is rooted in liberation, freedom, and activism, the creative ways that I challenge and teach my students. And so just all in all, I am talking about the sort of spiritual breadth of creativity, the practice of creativity, and the surrender to the vulnerability. And that's a word we will return back to, the vulnerability of creativity, right? And I'm talking about how all of those things drive all that I do and impact all that I am, right? So from the moment I picked up a camera, I knew that my desire was not to merely entertain, right? I knew that I didn't want to sort of merely have people have an emotional response to the work. I knew that I didn't merely want to build bridges, right? I knew that I didn't merely want to facilitate and begin much needed conversation around topics that are plaguing our society or things that we need to exhume or unearth. Um, but my main desire, right, was sort of to give visibility to those who have been deemed invisible. And because they've been deemed invisible for so long, that takes creating in a very, very different way, because it takes sort of debunking stereotypes. Sometimes it takes going against what some would see as creativity, right? Now, this doesn't mean, right, just because I'm doing that, that I'm not also thinking about sort of the actual traditional aesthetic and visual practice of films, right? I'm also thinking about, just sort of conceptualizing a world, a theme, a journey, a language of film, right? I'm engaged in all of that. But even beyond that, I am most interested and engaged in the spiritual connection that film and creativity, right? And being creative as a filmmaker has to God, and how that connection, when surrendered to, when listened to, right? That's another thing we'll keep coming back to, listen to. Um, I believe that it creates transformational change first in me and then in the audience, right? And as I said earlier, there is no one way to achieve this, right? I don't believe in subscribing to sort of this sort of self-help model when it comes to creativity, because the very nature of that can be stifling and can become analytical, right? And can get us away from this idea of embracing what I called earlier, dubbed earlier, a life of infinite creativity. So I'm going to offer you 8 tips, right, that have worked for me, things that I have embraced, things that I have subscribed to, and things that have been effective in my own creative practice, and really have allowed me to remain creative even during the darkest moments of my life. Because I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we assume that creativity only happens in creative fields, right? When we think of creative fields, we think of music, film, art, things like that. But I think all fields are creative, right? To be an engineer takes creativity. To be a professor takes creativity. To be a good chef takes creativity, right? There is a different part of the brain that, if you are to be effective in any field that you are operating in, there's a different creative part of the brain that you must not only listen to, but that you must embrace and that you must put into practice, right? And so I'm going to offer you very, very briefly these sort of 8 things that I believe have helped me to sort of sustain my creativity. The first thing that I'm going to offer to you is this idea of coloring outside of the lines, right? Um, I would challenge you, and I know this goes against everything that we think, but I would challenge you to stop basing all of your decisions on logic, right? Because one, I believe being a creator takes faith, right? Faith that literally the thing that you saw in your head will actually work, that it will come to fruition and serve the purpose that you thought it would, right? Because that's another thing about being creative. Creativity starts with a thought. And what that means in terms of coloring outside of the lines is that oftentimes, if you base what you want to create, or even again, this idea of being creative in the field that you're working in, if you base that off of logic or the blueprint, because there's always a blueprint. But if you base everything off of that logic and that blueprint, guess what? You're going to produce the same thing that everyone else has always produced. And that's not creativity, right? That's reproduction, right? And that is, in my opinion, cloning something that has already been done. And that may work for a little while, but at some point, the question becomes, well, what are you? without the blueprint? Who are you when you follow your heart? When you let that sort of creative part of yourself take over. Who are you? What are you? What can you produce without creating these boundaries, right? That you think you need to create in order to be successful. Because that's another thing that happens with us, is that we feel as though that if we color outside of the lines and if we go against the blueprint, that in some ways we jeopardize our success. And guess what? You may jeopardize being successful in the way that others perceive success. But the thing that you gain is creating something that is unique, something that the world needs, something that is not already created, and something that I believe will last long after these sort of reproduced ideas or reproduced things or reproduced ways of doing business, of again running a classroom, whatever it may be. I think whatever you create, if you listen and you color outside of those lines, will last much longer than those things. So first, color outside of the lines, right? Two, um, return back to that childlike wonder, right? Um, I have a 5-year-old, and sometimes we can hear him in the background. He's either talking to a stuffed animal or he's doing something that to adults may seem strange, right? We're like, what is this little kid doing? What is he doing? But what he's doing, right, is he is imagining something that may or may not even be there, because in his mind, the possibilities are infinite. What he can create is boundless. What he can see, right, goes beyond what his sort of human eye can see, or what his mind can almost imagine. It goes beyond that imagination, and it goes into a godlike, right, wonder and imagination, right? Again, this idea of faith, of seeing something that is not there, right, and believing that it can be, right? And it's interesting because I think for me, one of the best rules of writing that I've ever gotten, and I've always embraced this, um, is to not limit or temper, right, what you can write on the page in terms of a first draft. What does that mean? Don't think about it. Just write it. Yeah, it makes no sense. It seems terrible. There's no way I can pull this off, right? None of that matters, because what we're doing right now is we are allowing our minds to imagine and wonder what could be if, again, there were no boundaries, right? And that's what kids do, because they don't yet understand boundaries. They don't yet understand these sort of societal constraints and restraints that at some point, right, they will have put on them by the adults in their lives, the parents, the teachers, right, the system in general, right? They have not yet sort of had those things imposed upon them, and so I would challenge us to go back to that wonder. So when you're in that board meeting, right, and you are trying to sort of do that presentation, yes, everybody has a PowerPoint and they do it this way or that way. Do something different, right? Shake it up a little bit, right? Make people think about you long after it's over. Because if you do the same thing that everybody else did, guess what? That was okay. I saw that last week. It felt so familiar, right? But I don't want to be familiar, right? I want to be unique, and I don't want to be forgotten, right? Because I want to go back to, again, making not only myself embrace that childlike wonder, but if I walk into a space and I exude it, then I make other people begin to think about the childlike wonder within themselves. And now we all can have a different kind of conversation and a sort of unique connection with one another, right? So one, color outside the lines. Two, return back to that childlike wonder, right? Three, I think it's so important. And I'm an artist, but I'm also, as I said, an administrator and a professor. I think it's important that we are aware of and that we study the world around us, right? I always tell my students this, and this obviously pertains mainly, the way I'm going to say it pertains mainly to filmmaking and writing. Don't base your characters or your stories off of something that you've seen on, you know, a television show or that you've seen in a film, right? Because what you're doing now is you're recycling ideas, and you just might be perpetuating stereotypes, right? Because you've not done the research for yourself, right? You've not read that Wikipedia article, or you've not watched again that documentary, and you've not gone outside and actually talked to the individuals that you are going to make films about, right? You must be aware of the world, because in some ways, if you're aware of the world and you get outside of your comfort zone, the world and the universe and God will tell you what it is you should be creating, because it will come to you because you have an awareness of what's going on around you and you have studied. Right? That's also about being respectful of the world around you. I think oftentimes we move too fast and we don't take in. And I think when you don't take in, that means that you don't have a respect for, right? Sometimes going outside and walking instead of being in your car all the time listening to the podcast or the book or the music, sometimes that helps, right? Because now you are connecting with the world around you. You are studying it. Sometimes going to that coffee shop, and yeah, you may have your headphones on, but you're really not listening to anything. You're actually listening to the people around you. I call it creative eavesdropping, right? We do that all the time. Or we call it researching it, right? When we're making a film, we're researching, right? But really we might be stealing, right? But what we're really doing is we're studying and we're listening and we're hearing and we're taking in. And that's so important. Again, even if you're not in a traditionally creative sector, right? If you study the room, you hear people say that you got to feel the room, right? Let's think about that. If I'm given a keynote that has absolutely nothing to do with quote unquote creativity, it has to do with, dollars and cents. If I start to bore the room, I can feel it. And if I can feel the room and if I've studied it, then I can quickly pivot so that I can bring the room back to me, so that I can recapture their attention, right? And so again, I think it's just so important. And also, I think there's something about being aware of the world and studying it where you learn from the world, you learn from people, right? You also have the opportunity to interact with those who may not look like you, think like you. They have lived very different lives than the life that you've lived. Um, because I believe that's not only how we learn about the world, but that's how we build bridges, right? That's the creative sort of way of building a bridge, right? Of in some ways solving, in my opinion, some of our issues in the world is really admitting, again, right? We have these biases because we have not in any way put ourselves in a position to feel what others have felt, right? We move through the world judging others. And that, in my opinion, stifles creativity, right? So be aware of and study the world around you. That's important. And then follow your intuition, right? I talked about the sort of analytical side of you. This is number 4 now. I talked about this analytical side of you. And yes, I think I always have to say there is a time when you need to let the analytical side of you lead, right? Or maybe I should say take over. I never really lead with the analytical side. I let my intuition lead me. How am I feeling in this space? What am I sensitive to in this space? Right? I have, been asked to, talk about my work before and give keynotes countless amount of times. And sometimes I'll prepare a whole thing and then I'll stand there and say, this is not what this room needs. My intuition, that creative intuition, this idea of being able, again, to not only feel the room, as I said, of being aware of that, but to listen to me. What are my instincts telling me to do? Right? What is sort of that thing we always talk about? Something in my mind said, right? That's that spirit talking to you. What is the spirit saying to me in this moment that I should be doing? Right? What is the spirit saying to me in this moment that this room needs to hear, that they need to see, right? It also, I think about, being on film sets, and obviously, for my people out there who are not filmmakers, right? The best filmmakers um, go through a very, very sort of extensive uh, uh, sort of process of pre-production, right? Pre-visualization, right? Where we literally begin to conceptualize the film. I can see the movie play in my head. That process is a long and arduous one, because what it is, it's rereading the script. It's thinking about every shot and frame. It's watching other films. It's looking at, like you'll see here, I have tons of books. A few of them are photography books. It's looking at photographs and paintings, listening to music, right? Because what you're doing again is you are pre-visualizing, and in some ways you are tapping into the sort of DNA and connectivity that your work will have with the world once they see it, right? Because I think a piece of art must first impact you before it can impact anyone else. So I am connecting with the spiritual side of the thing that I'm creating, right? And I say all that to say that you go in and you have your shot list, and if you're director of photography, the person shooting the movie has, they have storyboards, and you've had meetings with production designers and art directors, and again cinematographers and sound mixers and carpenters, all of it, right? You've sort of laid the groundwork, and it, so that then, if as Alfred Hitchcock, right? He was so sort of meticulous with storyboarding that he could literally leave the storyboards and walk away if he needed to, because he already saw the movie, and he was able to put it on paper in such a way that everyone else would see it, right? But sometimes after you've done all of that work, and this is back to intuition, you may walk on set and say, "Man, that's not it. Not today." Right? Because of the work we did yesterday, and because of the thing that I'm feeling in this moment when I watch the actors, and the conversations that we had during lunch, and just when I walk into the space and I see the space in a different way, something else has taken over. This requires something. That's my intuition saying to me that, yes, I thought it through. That's the analytical side, right? I thought it through. I know it. I understand it. But in this moment, something else, my intuition, has taken over. And I think it is important to follow that intuition, right? I remember one of my professors said to me, if I dream it, right, at night before I shoot, I know that's the thing that I must do, right? Because again, that's that sort of, again, spiritual, sort of intuitive part of your creativity, or of yourself taking over. And I would challenge us to begin to really be sensitive and follow that sort of much more, right? The fifth thing, you know, failure is your friend, right? What does that mean, right? So none of us like failing, right? We grew up. If you played sports, I didn't really play sports a lot. I was bad at it. I tried. Um, if you're singing in the competition, if you're in the theater competition, if you're going up for the promotion, right, whatever it may be, um, sometimes we have failed or got rejected, I should say, so much that we cower from actually trying anymore. Right? That goes back to that childlike wonder, right? Because see, children don't know failure yet, right? We sometimes as human beings, right, as their guardians, as as the one who's supposed to be guiding them and leading them, as the adults in their life, I should say, um, we are the ones who teach them that they failed, because what they've done, right, um, exist outside of the norm. And so oftentimes what they do is they say, all right, well, cool. Now the way that I think is going to have to live within this sort of narrow idea, right? Because I know that I can be successful here. But I challenge us, right, to go back and try it all and be willing to fail, because it is through failure that we become not only more creative beings, but I believe that it is through failure that we find success, right? And as a creator, right, it is the most vulnerable space to be in, right? If you know anything about film, right, you make a film, you put it out for the public, and then immediately certain things start happening. You either start getting accepted into the festivals or rejected. You either get the good reviews or the bad reviews, right? You either get 100-meter rating on, Rotten Tomatoes, or you get 25, right? And so if you start getting the 25s and you start getting more of the rejection, then what you start doing is you start saying, wait a minute, I must be doing this thing wrong. And that doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement, right? We always have to think about improvement, but sometimes it's not that you're doing anything wrong at all. It's just that you're doing things differently, right? You're doing things in a unique way. You're doing things on a frequency that other people have not yet caught on to, right? And the only way that you get there is to embrace this idea of failure, not as something to stifle you, but almost as something to free you. Because the moment that I am no longer afraid of failing, I will do anything. I will create anything. I will speak up in any room when I see injustice, right? I will do that presentation in a room, in a very unique way, right? I may, do some hip hop during that presentation instead, right? I may dance a little bit during that presentation instead. I may play some classical music during that, right? I may do something that is so crazy and outside of the box, because guess what? I don't care about failing, because this is one thing I understand, that I'm free, right, from your ideas of failure, right? And so again, it's all right. Failure is, I think, not just your friend. I think failure is your best friend, because failure is the thing that catapults you towards success, right? Um, 6, I think it's important that uh, you embrace vulnerability. And you've kind of heard me say that already, but I kind of want to stay on this for a minute, because oftentimes doing things differently makes you vulnerable to people's opinions, right? Or leaves you open to their opinions. And with that comes vulnerability, I should say, right? Um, it's like, you know how it is. It's like taking that first leap. If you fall in love, saying I love you to somebody for the first time, that's very vulnerable. Because what if they say, well, I don't love you? Sorry, go home, right? Whatever it may be, right? So you put yourself out there in a way um, that can cause hurt or potential harm to you, right? But again, you must embrace the idea of vulnerability in order to possess, right, this idea of infinite creativity. Because infinite creativity understands that it can only be achieved through vulnerability. Because a good artist bleeds on the page. Not that you got to tell everybody your business. I'm not saying that. Not that every story needs to be about you. Not that everything that you do needs to be a reality show into your life. I don't mean that at all. But what I do mean is that there always has to be a part of you on the page, on the screen, on the canvas, in the boardroom, right? That leaves you a little open, because it's very personal, right? It's always the personal, vulnerable story that can capture people, because what it does is your vulnerability makes them vulnerable, right? Right. And anytime I'm directing a film, the first thing that I do when I walk into the rehearsal is I say, this is why I'm making the film. I explain that. And it always starts with a personal connection that I have to the material. It's a very sort of frightening place to be, because now what I'm doing is I'm giving you insight into my backstory, insight into probably that little scared boy, right, who doesn't really want anybody to know who he is, doesn't want anybody to be able to touch him, to hurt him, right? I'm giving you insight into that sort of insecure man, maybe, who, right, that is not quite as bold as he appears, right? I'm giving you insight into something. I'm giving you insight into some family secret that I never wanted anybody to know, some secret about me that I never wanted anybody to know, right? I'm opening up to you, right, or the actor, right, in this case, I'm opening up to them in this way because I realize that I set the tone, and if I am vulnerable in the moment, then once I start directing them and asking them questions about themselves, the fear, right, is gone, because they realize that this is not only a safe space, right, but that this is a place where we can be vulnerable together. And once we get there, we can now all together, right, fearlessly create, right, and really tap into, again, this idea of sort of infinite creativity, unbridled creativity, unguarded creativity, right? Creativity that moves beyond sort of the physical body, right, and taps into something much larger, taps into sort of the ethos, right? So yeah, embrace that vulnerability. It's scary, but you know, everything's scary. Surrender to the creative. This is number 7. Surrender to the creative force within you. It's there, right? I talked about it. It's there, right? That's the thing. We were born with it, right? We in some ways, I think even before we were born, it was sort of implanted into our DNA, as I said earlier. It's there, right? You've just put it in a closet, and you've stacked other things in front of it, and so it's in there. It's crying to get out. It's asking to get out, but you've hidden it. And I would say the way that you surrender to it is you have to listen for it again, right? Creativity is something that has to be worked on, because oftentimes, because of all of the other things that I've said, and mainly because of this notion of being vulnerable, what do? We fall back on the analytical side of us because we know people understand that, right? But that's the sort of almost that common language in the room, because 80%, 85% of society has shut down that sort of creative force within them, right? But it's there, right? And I would say the way you find it, right, is sometimes you got to just sit in silence and listen for it and ask it what it's saying to you, and ask it what it wants you to do, what it wants you to create, what it wants you to say, how it wants you to move through the world, how it wants you to impact the world, right? How it wants you to present to the world, right? You must surrender to it. And again, I'm not just talking about creative fields. This is in all fields, right? Surrender to that creative force within you. And again, stop being led by the analytical side of yourself, right? I even think of, like, doctors who have, or surgeons, right? Who have done, surgeries that have never been done before, right? Scientists who have found cures for diseases viruses that we thought were incurable. That's a creative mind. Yeah, there's a science behind it, but the creativity comes into the trial and error, the trying it all, and knowing that 85% of it, 95% of it will fail. And it doesn't matter, because guess what? I don't need 95% of it to succeed. I just need the one thing to succeed. Somebody once said to me, all you need is the one yes. Doesn't matter how many no's you get. But in order to get to the one yes, you must be willing to listen to the 90, 100, a million no's and not give up, right? And again, that's a surrendering to it. So again, surrender to that voice, listen to it, listen for it, find it again, strengthen that muscle, because it is necessary for success. And then lastly, I would leave you with this, and that is, I believe you must create on purpose, right? Oftentimes, again, when we talk about this idea of a spark of inspiration, we think that one moment we're gonna wake up and be possessed by some, oh, this creative thing has taken over. No, 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 no. It's a practice, right? Becoming creative is a practice. And so you must create on purpose, meaning that I am going to purposely sit down at the computer and write that screenplay. I'm not going to wait till the middle of the night when I rise up and the words come. No, sometimes I got to sit and look at the blank page for weeks at a time. Create on purpose, right? That brief, right, that I need to get together, right? I got to work at it. That presentation, right? It's not going to I'm not going to be possessed, like Oda Mae Brown and Ghost, right? That's not going to happen. It's not how that works, right? Right? You have to work at it. And that's the thing about surrendering to it, is that when you surrender to it, you listen to it and you listen to it. And at first, it may say nothing. It may say nothing at all. It may confuse you, but that's all right, because after a while, right? It's like training your voice to sing. Sometimes it comes out sounding a mess at first, but the more you do it, the more you train it, the more you strengthen it, the more you listen to it, right? The more you do it on purpose and the more you practice at it, the better it gets, right? And so you have to make sure, again, that you're creating not only on purpose, but with purpose, right? Why are you creating, right? I think about myself, and a lot of people go into filmmaking for various reasons, and none of these reasons are wrong, right? We must have a purpose for entering into a field, for wanting to do something, right? Because if we have no purpose, then again, we become easily swayed in the wind, because now anybody can use us in any way that they want, that they want to, right? And that ain't good, because the world will use you if you don't create on purpose and with purpose. They will try to sort of dictate to you who you are, what you are, who you should be, what you should say, how you should say it. They will do all of that, because what they realize is that they have a creator who is almost empty, right? Because they haven't listened to the sort of the creativity, the creative voice, the creative force within them. And if you're empty, they can do whatever they want to with you, right? So again, create on purpose and with purpose, right? So to go back through all of these, right? Number one was color outside of the lines. Number two was return back to that childlike wonder, right? Number three was be aware of and study the world around you. Number four was follow your intuition, right? And not the analytical side of yourself all the time. I have to say that all the time. Sometimes the analytical side may need to be the thing that takes over, but follow your intuition first, right? Failure is your friend is number five. Be willing to fail, because it is through failure that we actually find success. right? Embrace vulnerability. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable, right? Because it's sort of vulnerability and a sensitivity to the world, to yourself, to your own feelings, to the feelings of others. That's the thing that I believe takes us into the realm of creativity, right? Because creativity is born out of vulnerability, right? Surrender to the creative force within you. Remember, it's there. That little 4-year-old, he or she is in there. They're in there, right? You just got to maybe knock on the door and wake them up, right? But they're there. And the way you surrender is you listen for them. Listen for them. Wake them up. Talk to them. Find them again, right? And then lastly, you create on purpose, right? It is so important that not only do you create on purpose, meaning that you put the time in, you set the time aside, you do it. Maybe it's a daily routine, right? I used to have a daily routine where I would wake up every morning and write for 2 hours before I did anything. I wouldn't even brush my teeth. I'm gonna wake up, roll over, and start typing because that's when my ideas were fresh, right? Sometimes work gets in the way of that. So then what you got to do, you got to find the time anyway, right? Life gets in the way of it. Find the time anyway. Again, do it on purpose and then do it with purpose, right? Make sure that you are creating something that has a purpose, right? Sometimes at first the purpose is just to free you, right? That's another thing we got to remember. Everybody's not making these, grandiose projects that's going to completely transform the world, right? Sometimes it's about transforming you, right? Sometimes that thing is going to change you. It's going to affect you. It's going to impact you. It's going to impact your family. It's for that. It's for your own liberation, freedom, and justice, right? For your own emancipation, right? Spiritually and physically sometimes, right? But also there's a the larger purpose oftentimes with the work is that again, if it freed you, if it liberated you, if it emancipated you, if it made you sort of discover something about yourself again, if it made you see the world in a new way, if it made you build a bridge, if it made you begin to look at people that you have judged, that you didn't understand, if it made you begin to look at them in a different way, then just maybe, if it did that for you, that when you put it out to be consumed by a public, by the world, right, by those that become your audience or the audience of your work, maybe just maybe it will have the same impact and effect on them, right? So again, I leave you with this, right? Again, embrace this idea of infinite creativity and be creative in everything that you do because I believe that creativity and being creative and being a creator, which I believe we all are because we were made by one. Um, I believe that it is the embracing of that, right, that really begins to transform the world. And I also believe that we all were put here to have impact, to transform, um, to leave the world very different from the way that we found it. And it is through creativity, right? It is through embracing the creativity that lives within you. And it is through, again, what I consider to be a spiritual practice of embracing and finding an infinite creativity. I believe that that is the thing, again, that will allow you to have that sort of transformational impact that I believe all of us are meant to have. Are there any questions?
Yes, thank you, Yaki, for that inspirational presentation. There are a few questions. There's someone that might have misinterpreted something that you said, so I want to give you a chance to clarify. And it's actually a two-part question. What did you mean by not listening to the people who have shaped our lives, and who was a mentor and who has shaped your life as it is today? Who's helped you through this process?
Yeah, so I need to clarify that. I don't mean that in that way. This is what I mean. Oftentimes, there are individuals in our lives who stifle our creativity and who stifle our possibilities, right? Because they are speaking from a place of rejection, right? They are speaking from I mean, I've had so many students come in my office and say, I want to be a filmmaker, but my parents, right? They don't believe in that. They're like, you gotta pay rent, right? You want to raise a family, right? You want to have a family one day, right? You want to own a home, right? Well, that unless you Steven Spielberg or the chosen others, right? Then being a filmmaker is not going to do anything for you, right? And again, what I'm saying is that you have to listen to your heart and yourself. You can't always allow those individuals to dictate the journey of your life, because oftentimes, again, we don't realize that they're speaking from a place of being bruised and being hurt, right? I had a academic counselor at UIW. I'm gonna say it. Tell me this one time. What do you want to do? Oh, I'm gonna go to film school. Yeah, well, my sibling did that, and we see how that turned out for them, right? Now, as someone who was supposed to be a mentor to me, right? Think about this. If I was not for sure about what I wanted to do, guess what? That could have completely derailed me, because I could have said, "Yeah, you're kind of right. Like, yeah, who majors in film, and who from Texas is really a successful film? Well, Robert Rodriguez, right? So you start thinking that way, and what I'm getting at is you can't allow those sort of negative comments that oftentimes will come your way to stop you from going down a creative path. Because again, you got to listen to that intuition, and you got to listen to your own heart. Mentors, I mean, I've had so many. I mean, I hate to even try to go down a list, but I'll just say this: there have been many professors, many administrators. I mean, I think of two in Incarnate Word, Dora Fitzgerald, Roberta Leichnitz, who I don't really get to thank enough, who ran the McNair Scholars Program for a very, very long time. Someone who, the interesting thing about Roberta, I remember this to the point, nobody in the McNair Scholars was doing film, right? So it's like, how do we do? And she figured out a way to make it work, right? She said, because no, he's passionate about it. He wants to do it. I see the passion in him. And so we're going to find a way to mold this around him. And that's what she did. And so again, so many people, so many filmmakers, friends in my life, just there've been so many people who have been cheerleaders. And I will say that I have purposely surrounded myself with people who would push me towards my destiny and not try to pull me away from it. And that's important, because when you surround yourself with naysayers, after a while, you also become a naysayer.
Yes, I agree. Now here, let's see. What are some of the ways people in your industry are making a difference in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting. Tomorrow, I'm hosting our inaugural Diversity in the Media Symposium. Please join us tomorrow from 10 to 5. If you go to the Moody College of Communication website, you can register for free. That was a plug. Right, I did that well. But to that end, I think right now you are seeing a resurgence. I don't want to say like this is the first time this has happened, but you're seeing a resurgence in filmmakers making socially conscious, socio-political work, right? That speaks to the ills that are plaguing society. You are seeing the Jordan Peels and the sort of Ava DuVernays and the Shaka Kings and the Ryan Cooglers, right? You are seeing these people, the Lena Waithe, right? You're seeing people begin to exhume these narratives of individuals who have not had a place in the industry, whose very existence has been stolen from them and repurposed for negative purposes or whatnot, right? And you're seeing filmmakers and artists in general, journalists. You're seeing this, I think, in all areas of communication. But you're seeing these people begin to really use their platforms to change the world, to spark much needed conversation again, to bring light to those whose light has been diminished, to give voice to those whose voices have been stolen from them, to really again sort of change the narrative and center the individuals and the stories that have been decentered by mainstream media for so long. And so I think you're seeing something that we've not seen in a long while, and I hope it's something that we can sustain, because we've seen these movements before, and I hope that again we don't see this go away in the next 5 or 10 years.
Thank you. I have one final one here, unless another one comes across the screen. How do you overcome the fear of jumping off, just starting, jumping off? How do you overcome that fear?
You jump, right? I mean, it's right. So imagine this: you go to the Fiesta, Texas, or whatever, and you're gonna bungee jump. I have done this before, not bungee jump, but I have rappelled off of a 50-foot wall, right? The first time I did it, I'll never forget it. I got to the top of the wall and I said, well, if I fall, that's it. And I went and I did it. The next year I tried to do it again, and I stood there for too long. And I started to think about all of the different ways that I would be hurt if I did fall. I started to think about, okay, I may break my leg. Oh, wait a minute. And then I looked down. That's another thing. Sometimes you can't look down. I looked down. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm 50 feet high. What am I doing up here? And I rappelled only like 4 feet down. And then I got up and I said, y'all got, I can't do it. Because I allowed all of sort of the doubt and the fear of actually taking the leap to take over. Because guess what? When I got to the edge, I should have just jumped. And that's the thing. It's so interesting because this conversation also goes into, and if you know much about film, and I found myself in the situation too, the first feature is usually the easiest to make. Because guess what? You have nothing to lose. You just jump. The momentum takes you. After the botched distribution deal and the bad reviews and the money loss because you didn't get your money back, and the idea that you don't want to keep asking people to work for way below their rate, and the fact that maybe your agents and your managers are telling you, don't you make another movie for no money, don't do that, that's not going to do anything for your career. Now you have all of that sort of negative talk in your head, and it makes it much more difficult to make the next movie unless you have a cushion. But guess what? You didn't have a cushion for the first one. You just didn't realize it because you didn't care. And so you leap, you do it, you run, full at it. And if you get bruised and maybe broken on the way, that's all right. You get a cast, you get some stitches, and get up and try again. So how do you overcome the fear? You do it.
Thank you, Yaki, for that. I don't see any other questions popping up, but if our technical guru can scroll your website on the bottom, if people want to come and look at some snapshots of your film or learn more about you, where can they go to find that?
Yes, please. So I'm on all the social media platforms. I'm on IG, Yaki80, Facebook, Yaki Filmmaker, Twitter, Yaki80. Also, please visit my website, Exodus, like in the Bible, filmworks.com. That's all one word. And on that site, you can see most of my work. If you can't see all of the films in their totality, you can, read synopses, you can watch trailers, and then they will lead you to links where you can actually either purchase or buy the films. And so again, it's Exodus, filmworks.com, EXODUS, FILMWORKS.com. And you can also find me on all social media. Please watch the work, share it, talk about it. I'm actually in the process you know, ironically enough, of developing my next feature film, which we plan to shoot probably May or June of 22 in San Antonio. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, we are just yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and for those of you that came in a little bit late, you can continue to watch his presentation both on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel as well. So we thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.